it's a very weird, I got a lot out of that. Like I said, she was really, really gifted in a lot of ways, and I worked really hard. She made me work really hard and getting honest with myself, and really hard at communicating, learning to communicate with difficult situations and things like that, and a lot of heart opening, etc. But I don't know what to say. She kind of gradually went mad, maybe is one way of saying it. It's a very bizarre story. I have a close friend who also was working with her, and it's almost like sometimes we kind of say to each other, it's almost like too difficult to explain, exactly. Afterwards, I saw Narayan. I don't know if you know Narayan. She's a teacher at CIMC.
I've heard.
Yeah, she was one of my teachers, one of my main teachers, and I was, after I'd been through all that, and I had a lot of anger, in retrospect, and partly I was like, and partly people, I would try to explain to friends and stuff, and it was like, well, how did you kind of complied in that? You were complicit. And Narayan said to me, it's a little too simplistic. I mean, it's true, but it's a little too simplistic because so much wonderful stuff was happening, so much gift, so much opening, so much healing, so much learning, that it's kind of, I both wanted that and trusted that I was on there, and then somehow it got mixed with this other really strange stuff, And I didn't know. She wasn't, in the end, she wasn't actually fully qualified. So she was working somewhat semi-legally, and she didn't have a supervisor, all this stuff. And anyway, what should I say about it? It's, what should I say? It's very intimate as well, I'm really not sure what to say about it. She was, like I said, she kind of found the vulnerable spot where a person could be hooked. Okay, this is her bad side, her not so gifted side. So for me, it was around purity. So she somehow, I showed up there. One of my things was like, I have problems with my relationships. I mean, who doesn't? And also, and then there was like, sex was like not easy for me and complicated, and I wasn't free and sexually, and so I kind of brought this to her, and this thing like I said to you about emotions, like I don't understand myself, and it was clear that I was very dedicated spiritually, so that was the kind of mix, and somehow within that I became convinced, she sold me this idea that that I was somehow impure at some very deep level. And I was so, following on from the earlier story about the whole movement in meditation, so kind of committed to doing whatever it took, and spending money also, whatever it took for after my father died, anyway. Just whatever it takes. So if I'm really, like, deeply flawed and damaged and twisted and dark inside, then I need, okay, I'll go there, I'll so there was the thing for me, and it was Virgo, about purity. So that was the thing with me. With my friend, it was something different. She had a different thing that was her vulnerable point. And so I was sold on this, I need to purify this, whatever this is that I don't even quite understand. So I would now go 3 times a week and really dedicate, and often journal for hours and really track my process, looking for all these monsters inside, and and there was a lot of fear. So that's come back to what I said before. So the sessions would be a lot of fear, because it's like sometimes I would get stuck, in this whole thing, and she'd say, "You're doing that weird thing again. You're psychically abusing," and just crazy. I was like, "What's going on?" Well, you're not in touch with your. And it was super intense. So the thing back to what Christopher said, so something, in his teaching, just about see how something dependently arises. You go there with this fear based on a certain self-view, you get stuck and you think, what, it's because it's reflecting a reality here, or something in the situation, So, so this, I got interested in his teachings right at the end of working with her, and she was getting really kind of crazy and really abusive. She would throw me out and charge me extra money and all this stuff, you know. So it's weird. It's like it's you know, I'm being filmed now, and it's like but it's okay. It's a really weird thing for people to hear about. And like you said, they look at me and they think, but you're so strong and independent-minded. And I was caught up in something that was complicated, and I didn't quite understand. Anyway, I got interested. I got back into meditation towards the end. She was getting crazier and crazier, and I didn't trust her spiritually. So I had this kind of sureness of spiritual navigation that I kind of found again, if you like. And I said to her, I don't trust you spiritually. I think she was really shocked. But anyway, at some point, you know, hearing Christopher's teachings about emptiness and then understanding, dependent arising. Like, so much here is a dependent arising. And actually, it just, like, I got it, you know. And because I'd lived, seen it at such extreme ways, it made it so clear. It wasn't like a subtle thing. It was like really, you know, black and white. So it took a lot of courage to stop working with her. And I alternatively went to her and said, I'm not, you know, it's finished. I'm not doing this anymore. And so it took a real lot, you know, I was young guy, and I had to really kind of find my center there in my belly, and this is not right, you know. In hindsight, it's like I should have done that 2 years before.
No.
But it's okay. But it's complicated to explain. Like Narayan said, it's like there was so much good stuff, and and I had this vulnerability about purity and about dedication. Like, I have friends. If she'd have been like that with them, they would just say, "Screw you," you know. It's like, all right, so I fucked up. Well, fuck you too. It's like, and they walked out, you know. But I was like, okay, well, I really need to find out.
It's not that simplistic. She helped you a lot.
Absolutely, yeah. So
that's why you stayed. I mean, it's not just completely. What you said.
Yeah. So I grew so much in that, you know, and I grew a lot in confidence, and something was blossoming, and people could see, you know, something was really blossoming, like in my soul and in my heart, and so it's complicated. Anyway, so
it's a little bit. Really hate to sound too simplistic here, but it's a lot of, like, with a parent that is like your father, giving so much and abusive, and then giving so much and abusive, and you never know. I mean,
I think for me the thing was more. Like, if I look back, the thing was around the hook about purity, like, as opposed to a repeating of my father thing. But I do struggle with authority figures. I have to say that. So, you know, in astrologically, I have Saturn opposite my sun and a lot of other planets. There's a lot around my sun and Mercury, and I can't remember.
What's your horizon? Do you remember?
Horizon, what's that?
Ascendant.
Taurus. So I don't know much about it, but anyway, so I've got this Saturn thing, you know, authority figures, and I just get like a bull, you know, and it's hard. So I had that. I obviously had that with my father, really intense, with all that intensity, and this kind of, you know, typically this something in me, like I said about music, I just want, it's something wants to come through, and it wants to express, and that's all with the sun and whatever, and Mercury and all that. They're opposite this authority thing, you know. So I've seen that, you know. I still struggle with it, or it's still part of my karma, or whatever you want to say. But anyway, so.
But with Christopher, you didn't have that issue. No,
Christopher, I had a very different relationship with. I've sat with Christopher maybe 2 or 3 retreats.
And then you listen to
I listened to hundreds of his talks, really hundreds, and I drank in what he said, and I loved it. So I never went to Bodh Gaya, I never did those retreats. I heard loads of talks, and I heard the scent of those retreats at, you know, from a certain time period at least, that just I loved. You know, he was like very inspired, and you could just, it was great. So I really took in the teaching, and I really absorbed it, you know. But I didn't have any personal relationship with him. He probably wouldn't remember me in the, you know. There's long stories here. But anyway, his teaching was very influential, and I got back into insight meditation. And then I was in graduate school now in music, studying composition, in fact. I changed to classical music, classical composition. And then I was finishing, and my visa was running out. And I think I had this opportunity to work for a music publisher, just copying music, but I went there and it was like such an uninspiring vibe. So I thought, this is not what I want to do. So I'll go back to England and I'll go to Gaia House for a year. And so I thought I could go and sit with Christopher later. And then Narayan said, he's not even there, you know. So
what year was it?
This is 98.
98,
yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, so I decided, gave up my visa, and I put in an application for a PhD in composition, and I put that, and then I got on the plane to England for a year, and that was that was a very beautiful year. I had, through the therapy, I had actually become very estranged from my mother and accused her of all kinds of things, terrible, as bad as it. Anyway, so I went back and we'll see, yeah. When I went back, I lived with my mum for a year, which was really healing for us. It was really nice. And my father was dead, and she was kind of blossoming after their very difficult marriage. And it was nice. She still had her health and her energy, and she had grandchildren now. It was lovely, you know. And we sort of healed our relationship, not with any big process, just being there. And I did retreat after retreat and getting into it, and because of all this crazy movement, and because I'd just finished with this therapist, you know, Narayan said, well, maybe you don't want to jump into 3 months, you know, just see how it goes. So I did like a week and another week and another week, and then maybe a month. I think I did the November solitary, but it was fantastic. You know, it was great. I was so into it, and it was just, practice just blossomed, you know, the jhanas a little bit at that point, and insight, and lovely stuff. And then at some point in that year, I also got very ill with my Crohn's disease. So
first time?
No, it had been on and off for a while. So, so I canceled. I did that. I signed up for a 3-month retreat, then I had to cancel it and make it much shorter. But in a way, it was good. There was a lot of. I also met a sexologist. So the thing about purity with me, she had a lot of stuff around sexuality and really twisted, you know. And so I was like, you know, I was so almost like a medieval Christian monk for a certain period, with a celibate for 8 years, deliberately in my 20s and early 30s, because of that. I need to figure out this impurities, and you know. And
wow, you thought you were that bad.
Sort of. It was. You know, to be honest, a lot blossomed in that celibacy. To be honest, it was. But it wasn't.
But it came out of.
It came out of that, and her kind of like, you need to not be sexual for a while,
because there's something really wrong about you. You can hurt people.
Yeah, that came later. Yeah, more and more. But so it was all very mixed, you know. And anyway, so
you went to sexologists.
Yeah, so when I got back to England, and this year, and I actually saw a homeopath for my Crohn's. It wasn't very helpful, but anyway, in his same office, he had this guy who worked as a sexologist, and I had become so confused around sex. So I went in as part of my thing with Mary, and it got even more twisted and confused and in pain about it, like so kind of trying to repress my sexuality, or confused, and not trying to, you know, it's like I wouldn't. In my 20s, like not looking at women on the street is like ridiculous, you know.
Like a monk, really.
Like a monk, but a really severe monk, you know. So a lot blossomed in that celibate monk, you know. It was amazing, and it was kind of, it got really twisted.
There was a price.
There was a real price, yeah. So I saw this sexologist. He was great, you know. He was half Spanish and half German, and he had a real sense of humor. And it was, as I saw him, like, instead of three times a week for 8 years, it was, which I had with the other. It was like, I saw him like every few weeks for, I think, 6 months or something. It was very, and just immediately, like, all this stuff crumbled, and I wasn't on retreats, I was living at my mum's place and composing music, and met a young woman, and we got into a relationship. It was really healing for me sexually, you know, and working with this guy. And it was all like, everything had become so complicated and just became very simple. And it was like, what have I been like twisting myself up in this? And it just became, so it was really like, there was a kind of liberation sexually, and just I don't know what to say, a comfort and an ease and an opening. And this woman, she was very beautiful and very at ease that way. And so it was great. The whole year was like really, really healing and really rich in terms of meditation and stuff. By the end of the year, they told me I got a place doing a PhD. So I went back to Boston and was in the PhD program. But I was really into practice now. I was really like on fire. And so mostly I'd say that year, I was a little bit with Christopher, some groups, and a lot with Christina. And then I was in this PhD program and practicing a lot and doing solitary retreats and different group retreats and things. And at some point, I did a solitary retreat in the woods, completely solitary, in the woods in Western Massachusetts. And I had, it was great, like the samadhi went to a whole other level, like for me then, the third and fourth jhana was like amazing in the woods, and I just absolutely loved it, you know, and...
no more shaking?
No more shaking, nothing. It was all gone, completely gone, yeah. And just really kind of discovering the jhanas for myself and playing and experimenting. I was also getting into Ajahn Thanissara's teachings, I think, at that point, yeah. And finding the terror, it was just wonderful, you know. And on that retreat, as much silence of the mind and all that as there was now what I call an imaginal fantasy of being a monk, a Theravada monk. It was kind of part of what was inspiring me on the retreat, you know. And it was just really in the background, but I was aware of it. And then I think somehow after that, both the confidence I gained just from doing that retreat, like completely on my own, and just seeing how, also the year in England, but just seeing, wow, what's possible in practice. And then this monk fantasy, and that really started to become a real fantasy. Like, maybe I could be a monk, and, you know. And I'd had that, I have to say, I'd had that fantasy since I started meditating, you know, reading Ajahn Chah and all that, and I just loved that. Lifestyle was so romantic, I know, you know. So I was just, I was just in love, as an archetype, just loved it. And that Theravada thing, and the simplicity and the freedom and the heart, you know, all of it. And so then I was working as a composer. I was doing really well as a composer. Like, people were starting to pay attention, and you know, I had they're very rich universities, so I had everything paid for me. You know, I didn't have to worry about money. I taught 2 hours of composition for the undergraduates, and then I was free to write, and they would, you know, I had enough money to live, everything. Anyway, but there was this monk thing coming, and I was and at some point I just was like, well, why shouldn't I? And it was really that solitary retreat that tipped me over. And then I thought, I'm going to do this. And I the other thing I have to say about music, is like I told you, is I had really started quite late. So, like I said, when I got... And then I felt so, I don't know what the word is, touched, I think, by what I was able to do, despite starting late. Not even despite. Like, I feel it touches me, like the things I wrote, and I was never a virtuoso, certainly, but in the composition, like, there's something came through, and I felt really blessed, you know, to have done that, and to have given, you know, be part of birthing that, and that came through, and at that point with the monk thing, it was like I felt really good about the music thing, and it was like, well, I could just keep piling up these compositions, or I could go really into the Dharma, like really give myself. And I thought about my death, and I thought, what would I regret, etc. And it just tipped me over into the monk thing. Wow. And but it was hard to give up music. So I said, and the academic year was starting. They said, are you gonna be teaching this year or not? And so I said, okay, if this is a real thing, it will stay. So I committed to the year. This means the monks? The monk thing, okay. Yeah. I committed to the year and just watched what happened to the monk. But it stayed. It got stronger and stronger, in fact. Wow. And so then I thought, not as a reality statement, but my impression at that time of the Ajahn Sumedho lineage, which is where I would go on to Chithurst or something, was that they weren't like meditation intensive. Yeah. So really great as a way of life. But I thought, maybe I'll do a long retreat at Gaia House, get that under my belt and those tools, and then go and ordain. So I signed up for a year retreat at Gaia House. This is 2002 to 2003.
I didn't know it's possible.
All things are possible. Maybe it isn't now, I don't know, but it certainly was, yeah. and I managed to do it quite, with I don't know. They had a certain system then, so I did it. It wasn't that expensive actually.
Wow, wonderful.
Yeah, so that was
1 year.
1 year.
Silent, mostly.
Yeah. My brother got married about halfway through, and so I went to his wedding, and his friends were like, "What, is he going to come and just be silent?" And I also had kidney stones, which they thought were kidney tumors at first.
Oh, no.
So there was that whole hullabaloo, and I had to go into hospital for an operation for I think 2 days. Christine was very sweet; she came and brought me food, and so I had that not silent, but otherwise, yeah, it was silent. And
the marriage and the kidney stuff in the hospital.
Yeah.
Otherwise
completely silent. Yeah, and so and that was just amazing. So I took up my jhana practice kind of where I left off, and just was really into exploring. Just really I really want to explore this, and that was great. And then loads of insight and just beautiful. And so I was working almost entirely with Christina that year, and who was great, really helpful for me. And then actually, even during that year, I started to get more independent in my thinking. Back to your thing about independence. So, I could see like what I was interested in that maybe she wasn't so much. But I said, no, I want to do this, and these are the questions I have. And I was.
Do you remember?
Well, like one was about the nature of awareness, and I had this real thing about when people talk about the unfabricated or unconditioned or the deathless, it's like some people make it sound like they mean this, and some people make it sound like they just mean awareness, and some people, and I was like, I really want to know, and I was all this Dzogchen stuff, and it was like I think I say on a talk somewhere, at some point I was crying, I was like, I just so I had this thing, I was kind of independent in that sense, it wasn't that some teacher was saying, you really need to, it's like, this is, and actually people were saying, who cares, or does it really matter, or, but I was really, that was my,
very much resonates.
Yeah. So, there was, my independence was really starting to, in the sense of thinking for myself, I think was really starting to emerge there. I was very influenced by Christopher and by Ajahn Thanissaro as well, and Christina helped me hugely.
Do you remember like a certain point in which you can say here was some kind of a fork in the road and she really helped?
There was one thing that was actually really simple. I can't remember when it was. It might have been in the 98 when I was there on and off. It was really simple. I was in a lot of physical pain just from trying to sit cross-legged and not having the body that does that. And she said, just alternate. Just sit on a chair and then sit cross-legged. Don't. And then from that point, my practice just went so much deeper, just taking the pressure off. I was so willing to work with the pain. Just like, it's like it really wasn't fruitful. I had the determination. I could, put up with it, and I could sit with pain and all that stuff. And that's a certain training and good, but there wasn't a lot of breadth in practice either. There wasn't a lot of really deep samadhi or a lot of heart opening, because I was just dealing with this pain all the time, So certain things got developed, others didn't. But she just said that, and suddenly, but lots of things. She was helpful in a lot of ways. And at some point, I think it's fair to say I just started to get my own interest and my own independent, my own like, I won't take that for an answer. It just doesn't satisfy me, and so I kind of got on my own roll with things, and I started reading a lot more Mahayana stuff and taking that, and I did a lot of experimenting. That's the other thing. So there was these Mahayana descriptions and very little, the original text. There's very little meditation instructions. They're just how do you meditate? So I would kind of invent ways to meditate, some of which found their way into Sing Freeze in the book. But I started to get very experimental. And then I got really obsessed with the emptiness thing. It was really the thing. It was like, so the awareness thing was part of that in a way. And it was creative and it was beautiful and experimental and I can't remember what point, but things started to come together and sort of a way of conceiving of the whole thing where everything kind of made sense together, in terms of fabrication and ways of looking and that whole thing, and just taking that and going with it and seeing how so much can fit together and understandings of dependent arising. So a lot of that was triggered by, partly by Christopher, partly by Christina, and to significant extent by Ajahn Thanissaro, in the way he talks about fabrication. But then I think it's fair to say I took it all to a place where he wouldn't be comfortable with, I think, because he's quite Theravada, you know. So I just, started to feel like really, maybe it's confidence, just confident in my own ability to experiment and find out and ask questions and stay with something until, and reconceive things, and, so that, I think, maybe just gradually blossomed. And after the year, I think Christina asked me, do you want to think about teaching? And I was really, I'm not sure, certainly part of me was attracted, and to be honest, I don't know if you've had this, some of them be sitting meditation, there's like a spontaneous Dharma talk going on. It's like, but then I actually realized, it's this kind of expression thing. It's not just ego or wandering mind. There's something else. No. Anyway, so I thought about it for a while. And
what year was it? What year was it?
2003. That would have been the spring of 2003 when she probably asked me. And I said, I need to think about it.
Because it was 2002 that you did your...
Yeah, 2002, 2003 is the year.
The year. Okay.
And she said, well, Bhante Bodhidharma, the resident teacher, is leaving. Maybe you could think about taking that job. So it was straight in doing that. Yeah. And so I thought of that for a while, and I thought, okay. And then...
but what about your dream to become a monk?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Thank you. So during the year, again, I had lots of health problems. My digestion by the end of that year was a complete wreck. I couldn't eat anything. Everything I put inside was
the Crohn thing? Or?
It was Crohn's, yeah, in a larger sense, yeah. So I was a complete wreck, and I'd been to. I remember going to Ajahn Suchita one day. He was visiting a house in the States, and I went. A few people went to listen and whatever, pay respects, and the meal was there. So I took some. I think I got some really nice bread and a salad or something, and I took that. And other people brought food, and I went there and I talked to him, which was helpful actually. And I looked at the food, and it's like the only thing I can eat here is what I brought. Wow. Everyone was. I'm super allergic to milk and dairy, and people would bring all this stuff with cheese. Basically, I would starve as a monk.
Wow.
There wasn't a lot of. I don't think I have the robustness physically. So that was one thing. Second thing was during that year. It exceeded every expectation I could have had for practice in terms of what opened up, and I just thought, does one need to be a monk? It's like, look at all this riches. I couldn't. Are you okay there?
Yeah.
So that was like it recalibrated my thought. And then the other thing I have to say is I visited a couple of monasteries in California, and I really loved them. And I saw some stuff there about, I don't know what you call it, psychological development, and sort of not really, let's call it this in loose language, not really a very developed in terms of femininity, in the monks, kind of a bit over masculine and hot, and relationally they weren't that skillful. And I had done in all the good stuff with the therapy, that had really opened, so relationally and psychological awareness and the kind of thing, if we use this language, I don't really like the sort of blossoming of my feminine side alongside. So it felt like going into that would be a bit of a step backwards, and I was like, so all these things came together, and Christine said, what do you think about teaching, which is a way to be fully in the Dharma? And so I thought, that feels right. After a while, it took me a little while, but... Wow. And then there was still, I think, 2 years before I actually moved into Gaia House. But I did a lot of retreats in that time, and I started teaching during that period, and just developing my sort of my way of thinking about things and my way of experimenting in practice, and developing a lot of that stuff that's in Seeing That Frees was developed during that period. So it was great. It was really creative, and then it came time for me to move into Gaia House. And the first 6 months were difficult because there was nothing for me to do. I had very little responsibility, so it was kind of like, it was hard. But you could just
practice?
I could, but it was more like, I think, I don't remember exactly, but I think I remember feeling very unchallenged and feeling like, something wanted to come through and there wasn't, But so there was something about that was difficult in the first. But then I started, just more and more, and then it was very full on being, it was really a lot of work and quite obviously quite an intense crucible.